Welcome to the TCPalm Editorial Board meeting to interview candidates for Indian River County Soil and Water Conservation District. I am Larry Reisman, columnist and community editor, and I'm joined by fellow editorial board members Adam Neal, our editor and news director, Blake Fontenay, an Ed Killer columnist, and Louise Filipina, reader advisory board member. Special thanks to Bob Adair for meeting with us today and streamlining the process by completing a questionnaire ahead of time. Board members have reviewed it. The other candidate in this race, Shawn Frost, was invited, but is not here right now. And if he shows up, we will welcome him into the meeting. By the way, questionnaires and replays of our editorial board interviews will be found at tcpalm.com. At the conclusion of this interview, editorial board members will discuss possibly writing an editorial to recommend a candidate in this race. I'll lead the questioning and open it up to other editorial board members at the end. So we'll get started right away, and because of our time constraints, we ask that you keep your answers concise. So we'll start off with Mr. Adair. Can you tell us, you can go back to the beginning of your tenure on the board, but what led you to seeking a spot on the Soil and Water Conservation District?
Well, first of all and foremost, I work in the area as a research scientist in the field of sustainable agriculture. So resource conservation is a main tenet of sustainable ag. I'm also very interested in our lifestyle in our community. I'm very interested as a farmer in our water supply and other natural resources. And also, as Ed can tell you, is I'm a saltwater sportsman, and I'm very attuned to the estuary that's in our area, the Indian River Lagoon. I'm very interested in the fisheries as a sportsman. But probably overall, most importantly, I've more or less dedicated my career to promoting sustainable agriculture in the field of research to develop actual practices that farmers can use. And so that fit perfect with serving on the board of the Soil and Water Conservation District.
Thank you. Since we don't hear a lot about the district, can maybe you talk a little bit about what the district's purpose is and mission and things like that?
Sure. Well, we do have a website, so you can get the concise information there. But briefly, our mission is to provide resources, planning, assessment, and to help landowners and growers to actually implement and apply conservation technologies to their lands. Primarily, this is with farmers. And so we provide technical services to the growers and agricultural producers. We provide and help make them aware of cost share practices coming from multiple agencies. The NRCS, which is stands for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and it's a branch of the USDA. And through that service, that conservation service, the NRCS, they provide cost share practices to growers to help them conserve their natural resources. Predominantly in this area, that's water, but it also helps with reduction in the use of pesticides, very careful placement of fertilizers to make sure that there's no over-fertilization or that it's applied inefficiently. So we help provide and make available to the growers these resources that they're entitled to as residents of the state, as farmers in the United States, and also through the St. Johns River Water Management District.
Thank you. What would you say are the three biggest challenges the district faces right now?
Probably the biggest challenge is we have a dramatic increase in population in our county. 20 years ago, our county was primarily agriculture. Agriculture uses a large amount of our share of water in the district, but it's used efficiently. When it's applied to the land and it can be recycled. Residential is sort of a one-way use. It's withdrawn from the aquifer, from the Florida aquifer, and used. So what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in urban use of water. And we also see a contracting agriculture due to diseases and development. So what our main concern is how do we conserve this limited, it's not unlimited, this limited resource of water in the face of a growing population that uses almost 42,000 gallons of water per person in our county. That's according to the St. Johns River Water Management District. Now, conversely, a citrus tree in 1 year uses 1,000 gallons of water, but a lot of that water is returned back to the soil. So water usage, water conservation would be number one. And how to go about doing that. So that would be getting the funding to do conservation practices. For example, I advocate the funding to get a mobile irrigation lab. It sounds complicated. It's basically a technician in a vehicle that's equipped with ways to evaluate irrigation systems, to check to see if they're working properly, and to advise homeowners associations and urban users on how to most efficiently use that. The third one, I think, is there's an area that's been underserved and underfunded for agricultural producers in our county, and that is getting paid for their green space, getting paid to provide clean air and to provide water recharge. And more importantly, in this year, with a heightened awareness to the rising CO2 levels, to possibly get paid for sequestering carbon. We are growing trees. Trees require carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, and we fix that carbon dioxide as carbon in trees, in the cellulose of the trees. I think that's a resource that's been underserved, and I think there's ways that growers can get that funding. And then lastly, let me point out, we have a perfect storm for agriculture to fail if we don't do something quick, particularly in citrus with citrus greening disease, which is caused by a bacteria that can ultimately kill the tree. Thus far, we've spent millions of dollars, USDA, University of Florida, and other universities around the world trying to cure this worldwide disease. To date, we do not have a cure. And our county has several hundred, or we have 160,000 in ag, and now we're down to around 13,000 in citrus. At one point, we had almost 50,000 acres of citrus in our county. Those are the major things that are facing in our county that the SWCD can help and has to deal with.
Do you see sort of a resurgence at all in any way, or additional reinvestment in citrus right now? I know there are some growers that are, you see some new plantings. What's your take on that?
We are very, very fortunate to have state and federal funding to assist growers in the replanting of citrus, where our costs in the last year have doubled. So a lot of this new planting has been financed by state and federal funds, and that's important. However, growers are businessmen first. They love the land and they love agriculture, but if they cannot turn a profit at least in the short term, which would be 2 to 3 years, they're going to be forced to either look for an alternative crop, which none have really come forward, in a significant way, or they're going to have to look for another land use. The perfect storm that I referred to in the prior question is that if citrus fails, this citrus land will come on the market. And if it comes on the market for future residences, that'll exacerbate the water supply problem that I discussed earlier. So it's in our vested interest at the state, federal, and especially the county level to protect and sustain agriculture in our county, and in this case, citrus farming.
Thank you. Let's speak on that. I don't know if this is connected or not, but what was your take on the Florida legislators in the past session who wanted to eliminate soil and water conservation districts?
That was a tough pill to swallow. We're a nonpartisan, non-paid, volunteer special district by Florida statute that has served this county since 1945. We have done everything we can to protect agriculture in our state through the BMP process, where we're mandated to use to protect our water, which we want to do anyway, but there's a regulation required there for the Senate and for the legislature to try to abandon, which they tried to do. They tried to abolish the SWCDs in its first go round by a gentleman named Senator Hinston, I believe in Flagler County, that was a developer and got into a run-in with one of the people that was running for the office. So I think that it was that the legislatures were uninformed, and ultimately the problem could reside with the SWCDs, because quite frankly, most people, when I talk to them about running for office, their first question is, what is an SWCD? And so there was a weakness there on the part of the SWCDs. We were very familiar with the usual players that were providing the cost shares, and of course the growers, but the public was largely unaware. So I would say that the effort was misguided, and as it currently stands right now, it limits a diversity on our board.
What do you mean? What do you mean by it limits a diversity on your board? What do you mean by that?
All right, so that's a key question. So the way the statute was changed, that was recently signed into law, the Senate Bill 1078 became a statute 582. And what changed was new qualifications for supervisors to run. Okay, the first thing that I think was misguided was that anybody that was already elected and 2 years into their 4-year term is mandated to rerun for their office. I think that there's legal issues there where a duly member can be elected and then not allowed to serve and have to rerun. The second thing that I think was uninformed and misguided was the requirement for farmers. Now, on the surface, that sounds good. In order to be a member of the SWCD board, you have to be actively engaged in farming or have done so for the past 10 years and possibly retired. I am actively engaged. I understand what the intent was, but we had members on our board, for example, Marvin Carter, who was a physical engineer that knew more about stormwater movement in our Western County and in the urban area, currently would not have been able to run. So, and the second person was George Simons, who was also a physical engineer that works for some of the local water management districts, in particular, the St. John's Improvement District, which is the Marsh, which is being discussed for a development area. His understanding of how water moves in this county was key to how we targeted our priorities for conservation practices. So that would leave out an ecologist, that would leave out a geologist or a hydrologist or any other science person. I'm one of the rare individuals that's a scientist and a farmer. So I'm okay, but I think that narrows our ability to draw on resources with a very complex ecosystem environment and urbanization that's occurring in our county.
Thanks for helping to explain that. Um, when you look, you talked about development. What would you see are the areas in Indian River County most threatened by development right now?
Well, the easy answer is the area outside the urban service area. Um, the urban service area was designed primarily with the major intent was to control growth, to keep urban growth in an area, to look at higher densities, um, and then to preserve agriculture outside for the very reasons I talked to you about our water supply and environmentally and a viable ag. Agriculture cannot live next door to a school or possibly a hospital or a residential unit where we're applying legally and our right to do it with the right to farm law, applying crop protectants and applying organic matter that has an odor, and some cases with animals that is noise, as well as the tractors in the application. So I'm very much in favor of maintaining the urban service area, and except in unusual circumstances where stakeholders come together and agree that this area here needs to be expanded and incorporated into the urban service area.
Thank you. Before you talked a little bit about the Indian River Lagoon, can you address perhaps what the district has done in the last year or two, or what you have done over the last year or two to address the water quality issues in the lagoon?
Okay, one of the areas that we provide cost share for is stormwater discharge and water moving off of agricultural lands. Now, we have funded to the growers irrigation systems that run, and also through those irrigation systems that run very efficiently, that we can apply fertilizer. So that's a dual thing there. Now, as we apply those fertilizers, we can apply precision pinpoint applications of nutrients to the root zone, not to the water furrows, not to the areas away from the trees, but specifically underneath the tree. And we use drippers and micro emitters enabled to do that. So by efficiently applying nutrients to our soil when we need them, where we need them, at the right time, with the right formulation, we can avoid off-site wash off. Secondly, when we do have rainfall events, obviously, that cannot all be absorbed into the ground. And at that point, urban areas have runoff, and as well as ag and environmental areas also. So what we try to do is protect and keep on site any surface water discharge. And what we do is we use grassed waterways. So we have grasses in our furrows and vegetation that absorb any nutrients that possibly could be removed from the root zone. We also use devices called flashboard risers, which is at the end of a culvert are boards that hold back water at a desired level so that any nutrients that are in the soil that are suspended as clay or particulate matter, they can settle out and the clean water rises over the top of this flashboard riser. Those are huge ways to prevent offsite movement of nutrients and protecting the water quality of our Indian River Lagoon.
Thank you, Bob. Would anybody else have any questions? Blake,
Yeah,
Louise,
Larry, I've got a couple of questions.
go ahead, Blake.
Mr. Adair, A couple of things. One, I'm interested in finding out a little bit more about your take on the best management practices that the state has for dealing with agricultural runoff. As you know, I'm sure there are voluntary standards at this point. What would be your thoughts about making them mandatory?
We got to be careful about um, unfunded mandates. What we're trying to do is we understand that it's in the best interest of the grower to apply the precise amount of fertilizer, not to over apply. We think that best management practices based on sound science as a way to farm the most efficient way possible is the solution. I think a regulatory approach would take an abusive way on agriculturalists to who are already challenged with limited economic resources because of some of the things that I've talked about. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the approach to help provide funding for growers to implement practices. For example, right now we're developing soil sensors that we can put in the soil that can tell exactly when is an opportune time to provide irrigation. During a hot, dry, windy day, using telemetry with a weather station, with a soil sensor, that we can use a computer system to literally turn on the irrigation system during nighttime hours where there's minimal evaporation, minimal winds, and get the water and the nutrients applied together at the right time. So using um, best management practices, I feel, is the right way for growers to take part in this um, citizen problem. It's people that are living in the county, it's urban use, it's commercial activities, and agricultural activities. We're all responsible. So yes, agriculture shares in being good stewards to our agricultural land. A lot of these farmers are third generation farmers in our state. Our state's relatively young, but nonetheless, our farming heritage here in this county began in the early 1900s, and a lot of these same landowners are in place. They know the land, they know how to farm, they know how to apply the nutrients. And with the University of Florida and the USDA developing new practices that they can implement is a huge way to reduce any environmental problems due to the farming.
Thank you. I just had one other question. I know a couple other board members may wish to jump in here. But Mr. Adair, a couple of days ago, and you may have seen this article, but TCPalm published a story talking about citrus greening and the efforts to develop plants that are genetically resistant to greening to save citrus in the future. And I'm just kind of sensing that this is a race against time, since there are developers out there trying to develop a lot of this agricultural land. And I guess I'm just asking, how optimistic are you that there can be solutions, workable solutions to citrus greening while there's still land left to farm in Florida?
Well, that's sort of the, to be honest with you, like that's the key question. Not necessarily of this interview with me as an SWCD. It's almost like I feel like I'm answering as a citrus researcher, but nonetheless, I'll try to answer it. What we've done in the last 14 years since greening came into our state is that we've developed really good horticultural practices that can help manage diseased trees. We do not have a cure, but we've improved our horticultural practices tremendously. I think there's a tremendous need to continue to provide research funding. I think the idea of using a rootstock with an improved resistance to the disease. All our trees are grafted. So we have a scion, that's the orange or the grapefruit that gives us our fruit. And then we have a rootstock that could be a lemon, or it could be some other a variety of citrus that has resistance possibly to this disease, as well as maybe a GMO, a genetically modified organism, if it's done in a thoughtful, precise way, that's what we're looking at. That combination would very likely provide a solution. That's going to be years away. However, in the interim, our ability, we're seeing which varieties are tolerant and what rootstocks are tolerant. So we're hoping to bring those together. Now, the most logical thing is to look for an alternative crop. So we at the Florida Research Center have looked at avocados, we've looked at peaches. We have a neem plantation that we're working on, which is a tree from India that produces a botanical warehouse of antimicrobial and insecticides that are all safe. They're generally regarded as safe compounds. So my solution is research and proper management, horticultural management, using some of these new practices that we've developed to keep trees in production.
Thank you.
Ed, would you like to go? Ed, you're muted. You're muted, Ed.
I'll do it. There. All right. Good seeing you again, Bob. It's good. It reminded me I need to come out there and check out your neem trees, your neem grove.
Yeah, I know. I know. I hesitated at putting that. I mean, I don't want to get this thing into a personal deal, but go ahead with your question. I look forward.
Okay, my question, real quick, just not waste our time. But anyway, I got a couple questions. Real quick, how many full-time employees work for the Conservation District, and how many part-time employees work there?
Okay, that's a good question. Currently, we have a full-time staff assistant that handles all the checking accounts, the expenditures, the business of the operation, the communications, maintaining the website. Now, here's where I think we need funding. We could use another technician, and these technicians can go to the growers, help them with their irrigation, help put conservation plans in place. So getting an additional staff person would be good. Now, in the past, that burden fell on the county. However, there's possibilities that we could get outside funding to pay for that. But then again, you're hiring somebody, as you're familiar with your experience at the University of Florida, when you get an OPS person that's based on grant funding, it's a limited term. But I think to answer your question, yes, right now, one person, but we do have participation from the county extension office, the extension agent. We do have participation from the NRCS, and we do have from time to time people from the Water Management District, from Florida Department of Agriculture, but having another staff position, that would be a great addition to our office. And that might be something that we should set as a priority as a board.
Next question I have is, we were talking about land use changes. One of the land use changes I've seen in Indian River County and some of the western areas is places that used to be groves have now become row crop, agriculture like tomatoes or peppers. Are you familiar with how much acreage has been converted into that type of land use?
It's in the scale of things, it's small, but I would say that it's very important. And those types of enterprises generally are farm to fork. Now, if you're referring to the one out in the marsh west of 95 on the north side, let's see if I can remember. I'm pretty sure those are farmers that have bought that land or leased that land that have come from the West Coast. And because of the water crisis out west, they're coming here where water is free and setting up their row crop operations. They have not approached our SWCD board for cost sharing. And I think that we can ask, but that's a voluntary thing. I think it would be very good to get that large operation with us. But the smaller operations, the hoop houses and growing lettuce and consumables crops for local restaurants, that farm to fork, those are usually less than 20 acres. There's some mariculture or aquaculture projects. There's some growing mushrooms and lettuce, tomatoes, and things like that. All that is good, but it doesn't deal at the scale of the decline that we're seeing in citrus. That's large acreage.
The question I have, I guess, that applies to you about that type of agriculture, about the larger scale row crop agriculture, not so much the hoop stuff or the small scale lettuce guys or the aquaculture, but is the water use, like you were talking about at the beginning. The water use is very different on those farms, say like from the South Florida. Like I know that there's a tomato, they put tomatoes or something off Oslo Road east of 95, maybe 200 acres or something there. The water use is very different, and there isn't. You talk about the best management practices and how they apply for citrus. I could see that, but I don't see this when I've been in those fields. I don't see the same kind of best management practices in those vegetable fields. Can you speak to that a little?
Yes. Now we're getting to the controversial part. Did you notice the type of irrigation system they had out there?
I did. And that's a good question. I didn't know if it was drip or if they were using the ditches. I didn't notice that. I can't remember that.
Well, okay. So let's see, how do I say this? This is reliable hearsay. What I'm hearing is they're looking at bringing their irrigation practices with them. And they are doing some subsurface drainage tiles, I've heard. But I've also heard, and this is very disturbing, that they're talking about using overhead irrigation. Now, this is where we got a problem. Citrus is a perennial. We've got irrigation perfectly worked out for citrus. Now, with this telemetry and soil sensors and weather stations, it's beautiful. Now, citrus fails. A new type of agriculture comes in. Is it a perennial? No, it's an annual. That means we're turning the soil over each year. Now, they do good practices, don't get me wrong, but to use an overhead type of irrigation, that is not how we conserve water. So you've hit something. There's a weakness there. Our board is aware of it, and we will be looking towards getting our information and technologies available. Whether the owners want to participate or not, I do not know.
Well, I guess that's the last question I have. Does the Soil and Water Conservation Board have any kind of authority to enforce any rules about what kind of irrigation it can choose to use or cannot? It seems like it's most of this is voluntary, and you guys are mostly an advisory board. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. We can provide the services. We can educate, we can let them know what kind of cost share is available. But now once they decide to do that, now they're under the requirements to maintain those conservation practices. They're required to implement those best management practices. They're required to maintain the structures, flashboard risers, irrigation systems, telemetry, weather stations. They are required to keep those in place throughout the duration of that contract. So that regulation is required by the granting agency, which would be the NRCS, Department of Ag, or the Water Management District, or who else. We don't provide the money. We help administer the money. So there's a big difference. So ours is providing technical services. It is voluntary, and we can make things known. So we can only just advise them on what to do. But by communicating this to the public and letting them know, that will put more of the onus on these growers to implement. these cost share practices, these conservation practices. Better said, these conservation practices.
Okay. I just have one follow-up, one more question, and I'm done. When you said earlier that there was 50,000 acres of citrus, now it's down to 13,000 for a variety of land use changes, as well as the citrus greening, which I know is terrible. When I left the USDA in 2005 to come full-time here, I worked for Tim Gottwald, and he was definitely, that was his biggest concern, was what greening was going to do to the citrus industry in Florida. But do you have a record of how much of that, I guess it's about 37,000 acres, of what that land became? Like, did it become other types of agriculture, or did it become development?
Okay, so what we have in terms of our conservation assistance through the NRCS, we have programs, for example, the Wildlife Habitat Improvement Program, the acronym is WIP, and that's a voluntary program to produce high quality habitat to support fish and wildlife. So a landowner could abandon their citrus grove, say, hey, look, we're not going to farm anymore. We want to go into a conservation reserve. So the WIP program, if there's wetlands there, there's another program called the Wetland Reserve Program that would preserve wetlands. That would be huge because that would help resupply our water supply, replenish the aquifer. And then there's for grasslands, really not in our county, but in other counties, grassland reserve program. And then lastly, there's a conservation stewardship program that can encourage growers to use a comprehensive program of BMPs. It's a little change in verbiage, but primarily, I think what you're getting at is if you did abandon the grove and you wanted to take it back to native habitat, one of the ways to do that would be with this wildlife habitat incentive program, and those things are really powerful. Now, if that funding were to increase, then more growers would be willing to say, hey, we're not going to sell it to a developer. It's better for us over the long haul to hold on to the ownership of that program, get paid a management fee to deal with exotic species, Brazilian pepper, the typical thing, to maintain this wildlife habitat. Those are really great opportunities. Now, we can't do that for all the acreage, but certainly some of that acreage. And then the idea of finding an alternative crop, I think, is one of the better remedies. So between those two, or a cure for greening, those are pretty much your options.
Thank you. This is my last question.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Bob. Is there anything else, Bob, you'd like to let us know, particularly about the campaign or things why people should vote for you before we sign it off?
Well, I mean, my advocacy for agriculture is in my genes. I mean, it's my grandfather was a farmer. My father had citrus groves in Central Florida. I love farming. That's what I like to do. I told you the reasons why I think we should keep our agriculture viable. I'm a sportsman. I want to be able to protect the lagoon. I have a vested interest in doing the right thing for our environment. I guess, I don't know, if I'm reelected, I would pledge that I will continue to do all I can to conserve our county's valuable resources for agricultural use, for domestic use, and recreational use. I've already said that. And then lastly, what I haven't said is by conserving these resources, this has a tremendous environmental benefit. And I'm talking about maintaining our ecosystems west of town. 2/3 of our county, perhaps more, is in natural habitat, and we want to protect that. If those water levels go down, then you start talking about snail kites, habitat loss, fish, wildlife, all types of ramifications. So I'm for the environment, I'm for the lagoon, and maintaining the biological diversity and integrity of the ecosystems in our county at the headwaters of the St. Johns River Water Management District, and also important, a key location in the Indian River Lagoon.
Thank you, Bob. We appreciate your coming on today and for volunteering to run a campaign. We know it's not easy, but it's an essential part of our society. Thank you again. And for the audience, please continue to visit TCPalm.com for the latest information on the November 2022 election. Thanks again. Take care.
And thank you, Larry, and thank you, TCPalm. And it's good seeing you, Ed, and all your other editors. Thank you so much.
Good seeing you.